military assault on Iran, and this isn't a limited strike. President Trump is calling it a massive and ongoing targeting of Iran's nuclear program, missile industry, navy, and even signaling support for regime change. Explosions rocked Tehran as Israeli forces reportedly targeted senior leadership sites, including areas tied to Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. While Iran says its top officials are alive, the message was unmistakable. This was decapitation-level pressure. Iran responded with an unprecedented wave of ballistic missile strikes toward Israel and U.S. targets across the region. Explosions were reported in the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Bahrain, all home to U.S. bases. Flights in Dubai were suspended. At least one death has been reported from falling missile debris. World leaders are urging restraint, but the region may already be sliding into a broader war, and Trump is openly suggesting the Iranian people should take over their government. Jess, I think the question here is are we about to enter a forever war with boots on the ground? Or is this, another misadventure, or do you think this is possibly the wind that topples over the regime? Any thoughts here so far on this attack?
Well, I don't think that your third option of this being a win that topples the Iranian regime is distinct from the prolonged war or forever war option either. Mm-hmm. And we should note that Israeli news for the moment is confirming that the supreme leader has been taken out. The Iranian foreign minister has been on TV this morning saying that that is not his understanding and that the top officials for now are safe. So we'll wait to see how that plays out. I think it is important that the Israelis are saying that this has been the product of months of preparation. Yeah. So I don't know if this was something that they started doing in a silo and then the U.S. jumped on board more recently, or if the plan has been in conjunction for those several months. But I think that's an important kind of backstory to this. The thing that feels different about this from other actions that President Trump has taken in both the first term and the second term is that he actually gave a speech where he said there may be American casualties. Mm-hmm. And he campaigned both times on being the peace president. He loves to take a victory lap on being right about Iraq and Afghanistan. And this was something that was really uniting for both the right and the left at this point, that people don't want to be in these wars anymore. And you're seeing veterans from across the political spectrum who are about my age, who signed up after 9/11 to go and risk their lives, saying, what's the deal here? Haven't we seen this movie before? And that's what's of principal concern to me right now. But I am, and I think you feel similarly, and you should be taking a victory lap since you've been talking about this the last few weeks. I think Iran is downright evil, right? Mm-hmm. It is a terrorist organization posing as a government. They fund terror all over the region. They kill Americans. They make drones for Russia. They buy Chinese oil. Their people live in a perpetual state of having their human rights violated. That's such a small way of even stating it. And so I think it's a good thing if Iran is under attack. And Mark Carney actually released a statement in support of what the U.S. and Israel has done, which is also interesting at this particular moment. So I am conflicted at the moment, but very afraid of the prolonged war option. So option 1 and 3 blended. What are you thinking?
Those are interesting points. Look, anytime you start firing missiles, there's just unintended consequences, right? You just never know. Mission accomplished. I think of that banner.
Yeah.
I do think so. I used to run a strategy firm, and one of the biggest mistakes you make in strategy is you tend to look at what's happened as the inputs for future decisions. And when I did scenario planning offsites with management teams, I would always say you need to look at what hasn't happened, because that's the most just as valuable an input. And what I would say is over the course of the last several months, what hasn't happened in the region is almost as illuminating, and in my opinion supports further hostilities, including this attack against Iran. And that is, since their air defenses have been wiped out, since the what I think was the most precise anti-terrorist action in history against Hezbollah since effectively these massive uprisings against the Islamic Republic by the Iranian people, which they have paid a huge price for. What hasn't happened is just as illuminating, and that is the Straits of Hormuz have not been under a constant level of havoc or siege. You haven't seen missiles flying into Israel from Hezbollah. You haven't seen all this sort of insecurity and, quite frankly, terror. Syria has been decapitated. Russia is no longer a threat there because they've lost their proxy in Syria. The hands of Iran have basically been cut off. And I would argue that this is, if you will, a bit of a blinking green light that we should finish the job. And in addition, any regime that obviously kills 30,000 people in what was reportedly a 48-hour or 72-hour period is a pretty oppressive government. And also, I've always found there's some inconsistency here about people who claim to be feminists or are anti-war. What I find is that they're just anti-West. And that if you think about a regime that actually, one of the punishments for women is to blind them, this is a regime, I think that the world in the Middle East we could unlock a decent amount or a decent period of peace if the regime was toppled. I've also thought that Iran has tremendous potential to be an ally. But with respect to this specific attack, there are some real challenges. We like to think of regime change as you think of Libya or Syria or Iraq. So Gaddafi, Assad, and Hussein. But actually, the IRGC is much more decentralized. There's 100 to 150,000 people who I think are members of the Guard. You have the IRGC is much more integrated into the economy. So there are large swaths of the population who is not just sit back and see who the next leader is in the morning television. It's they're getting their mortgage and their paycheck from the government. The government actually controls the oil there, even some of the retail. So this regime is more deeply integrated, if you will. It's not just about taking out Khomeini. I think the two things that will kind of define short and long-term success here are, one, first and foremost, if you see the Iranian people rise up, if they see this as confidence, wind in their sails, and they're willing to take the kind of risks they've been taking through protest. Obviously, the effectiveness of the military strikes, how effective, I would imagine basically the U.S. has said, we'll hit them from the air, but your agents in the Mossad are going to have to do the really dirty, dangerous work, and that is assassinations of high-level officials on the ground. And it sounds like that's already underway. And then the other thing I think we just need to think about, and I'd love to get your reaction, is that we can't go in, bomb, come up with an excuse for why it worked or didn't work, leave, and then leave our allies in the Gulf vulnerable. So if all of a sudden Iran regroups, rearms after the U.S. has come and gone, and then basically says, okay, we're going to arm, and then in a matter of a few months, we're going to basically take what the UAE and Dubai has built and tear it down as a symbol of what happens when you partner with the evil West and take down all those, basically destroy, technically they could destroy in several months what is Dubai has built over the last several decades. It strikes me that we're going to have to, our ability to defend our allies in the region will be as key to long-term peace there and stability as our actual victory or lack thereof within Iran. Your thoughts?
Absolutely. And I think we should note as well that we were in the midst of diplomatic negotiations, or supposedly. The U.S.'s view was that we weren't getting anywhere, but the Omanis said that the Iranians had gotten very close right? to all of our asks. And so the timing of this feels a little wag the doggy when you think about Bibi Netanyahu and what his aims are. The U.S. and Israel have allied interests in a lot of cases, but Netanyahu does what Netanyahu wants to do. And we have gotten on here and talked about it on Raging Moderates many times that Netanyahu has Trump wrapped around his finger, and that he oftentimes gets to do what it is that he wants and what he thinks is best for Israel over our chance at a diplomatic solution. So, want to note that that is out there, and that also, from what we've read, that the solution to this that the Iranians apparently got close to signing looked a lot like the nuclear deal that Trump tore up in the first administration. And I remain befuddled at how we could have obliterated their nuclear capacity just a few months ago in Operation Midnight Hammer, which we all said it was bipartisan success rating on that. And then now suddenly they're just a few days away from a nuclear weapon again. And I realize that that's a great talking point for people that want to take out the Iranian regime. Again, they are very bad actors, but people are sick of hearing that. And Donald Trump had that opportunity in the State of the Union to make the case to the American people about why there had to be regime change in Iran, why we might lose American lives in the Middle East again, that movie that we have all seen before. And he did not do that. And just saying, to your point, to the Iranians, take over your government. If the IRGC is made up of 150,000 to 200,000 people everywhere from the supreme leader to the guy who owns the local store, right, in the mall, how are these people going to rise up and take over their government? It just feels like the right thing to say when you give an address in the middle of the night from your beach club. And then we all wake up to wondering, excuse me, what does any of this mean? He has gotten, we have much better relationships with countries like Saudi Arabia. They released a statement in support. I already noted that Canada did, which I think is a big deal too. But there are more questions than answers at this point, and we are also a few days away from when Congress was supposed to vote on war powers. And people fought very hard to try to hold the Trump administration to account on this. They have subverted Congress every which way, whether foreign policy to tariffs. And I think that timing can't be ignored, right? That we were going to actually hear from people the for and against of why Trump should be able to unilaterally declare war, which is essentially what he has done. And now Congress is sitting there saying, excuse me, what is the point of having three allegedly co-equal branches of government? And they did give an intel briefing, and Democrats were in there, Mark Warner, Jim Himes, et cetera. And their response coming out was, this is very serious stuff that they're talking about, and it needs to be debated. And the American people, via their representatives at the very least, need to have a say.
I feel like the co-equal branches of government, part of our Constitution, our democracy, I feel like that ship has sailed a long time ago.
I want it back, though. Turn it around.
I'm with you, but it seems to me you could point to a lot of different quote unquote conflicts that were masquerading or cosplaying, war, where we didn't seek congressional approval. But I think you can do the right thing for the wrong reasons, and I think that's what's going on here. It seemed pretty obvious to me at a State of the Union that we were going in. He kind of talked about it, but didn't have a lot of heated rhetoric, didn't say we're going. It was just, he purposely, in my opinion, they said, this is a head fake, just don't bring it up, don't talk a lot about it. He really didn't reference it very much in his State of the Union, because he was clearly saying, we don't want to give them any more notice than they already have. Two, so why is he doing it? One, first and foremost, I think he's trying to create another distraction from the Epstein files. Two, I think the macho Riz success of the military action or operation in Venezuela, he absolutely loves. It's like that was the day after that operation was the best he's probably felt in a while. He wants that sugar high or that Riz high or that macho high again. And also, I wouldn't be surprised if Secretary Rubio was jonesing for this, because quite frankly, I think these military actions, every time they happen, increase the likelihood that Secretary Rubio is going to be the front runner for president.
Certainly over Vance, yeah.
Oh, 100%. He looks like a leader here, and I would imagine that was very much in favor of this and whispering in Trump's ear. Now, that's not to say, and then the other sort of, this trope I've heard, or this talking point of, it is Netanyahu and AIPAC who are basically the ones controlling the president and are the only ones in favor of this war, which is a far-right talking point. I quite frankly think that's just blatant anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism. And the notion that Israel is the sun, the earth, and the moon that everyone rotates around. It falls into the same ridiculous anti-Semitic trope that Jews control everything, and the notion somehow that AIPAC can convince Donald Trump to go to war. And it's also, and I love what Ella Laban said, to not acknowledge that occasionally different entities can have mutual alignment around something doesn't mean one is controlling the other. And so, absolutely, I think Israel's going to play a critical role in this because they have more on-the-ground intelligence. It's fairly clear that the Mossad has massively penetrated the Islamic regime or republic at the highest levels, as evidenced by the fact that the way they took out their air defenses was to assassinate the top dozen people who could give the order to fire those those surface-to-air missiles. It's clear that they are a key component of kind of of assets on the ground. But this notion that that Netanyahu and Israel and AIPAC control the president, it just again falls into this basic trope that we as Jews control the banks and Hollywood and control everything. There's no way. Trump absolutely is doing this, again, not necessarily for the right reasons, but this was America's decision. I think the person who is probably most responsible for this is probably Secretary Rubio. I think if he pulls this off, or if our military pulls this off, he will come off. He will absolutely be the front runner for the presidential nomination on the Republican side. And this, again, I just think that the president loves this type of flex. Any closing thoughts before we run here, Jess?
Yeah. I hope that you don't think that I was propagating an anti-Semitic.
Oh, no. You brought it up. You just mentioned
I'm conscious of it, and that wasn't my intention. My point was to emphasize that Netanyahu is a very powerful and very persuasive world leader. And the U.S.-Israeli relationship is a special one, and for a good reason. They're the only democracy in that region, and they have our backs and we have their backs.
Yep.
My point was just to highlight that over the course of Donald Trump's presidencies, Israel has been able to persuade, and we have mutual interests, but bring us over to their mode of thinking. And we know that they have thought that Iran has to be taken out because they have been saying it for decades. That was my point in bringing that up. And if they were plotting for months to do this, they make plans a decade in advance, right? Like, look at what they did with the beepers. So that was my point there. To the Epstein Files thing, this is very tinfoil hat, but it's Operation Epic Fury, Operation Epstein Files. Not sure if that's actually it, but I've been on all corners of the internet.
They sound like 8th graders playing World of Warcraft.
I know.
Operation Epic Fury.
I know, but let's have a little fun, right? Because maybe we're going to war, so let's just say it's about the Epstein Files. Trump definitely relishes these moments. You could see that in his speech or recorded remarks, however he did it, because I woke up to it like most everyone who lives in America. We'll know more, obviously, in the coming days. There's an expectation that this is going to be a kind of like stop and start operation, that basically we do something, then they retaliate. And so far, the retaliation has been in kind. It hasn't been to go and blow everything up by the Iranians. And then in a couple days, there'll be another trickle of these things. But there will be a lot of lost life of civilians. There are already reports that a school got mixed up in this and 40 plus people are dead, including a lot of kids. We got to be really careful here. I mean, we just quasi ended what was going on in Gaza and where there was a completely unacceptable loss of innocent life there. And that doesn't mean that I don't believe in the mission. And I'm so glad the hostages are out. And October 7th was what started all of that. But we have to be very careful about this because it's the right thing to do to protect innocent life, obviously. And the Iranian people, net, are the ones in the streets, right, telling us that they don't want to live like this anymore.
I think that's the fulcrum of whether this works or not. I think in the next 48 to 72 hours, we're going to have a decent idea of the outcome here based on what happens in the streets of Tehran in terms of protests. But I've also thought that when the far left and the far right meet, that's when you've got to really watch out. And what I've seen from both the far left and the far right is this anti-war rhetoric that I would describe more as anti-West, where we have a moral color code that is when brown people kill 30,000 other brown people, it's a cultural misunderstanding, and we start using terms like forever wars. They don't hold what they perceive as non-whites to the same standards we would hold other nations. And also this notion that we need to be, that this is somehow that Israel is the tail wagging the dog here is just fucking ridiculous. But I would bet
I did say that.
You think that?
To some degree, yeah. I think Netanyahu is an excellent salesman for the preservation of the West, which I believe in, absolutely, and the post-World War II order. And I think that Donald Trump is always looking for an off-ramp from the problems he has at home with a bad economy and Howard Lutnick, on Epstein Island, and Kash Patel chugging beers with hockey players and everything else that's going on. And both of them relish being a wartime president. It is the safest place that bad men can be.
Well, but there's a difference between control and influence. Control would be Netanyahu calling and say, look, I'm going to start
persuasive
AIPAC and other people against you and other candidates unless you do that. I don't think that's the situation here. I don't think they have that kind of control.
And I don't, AIPAC, I'm like, that's a whole other episode, which I would love to talk about what's going on with AIPAC. I'm straight up talking about how good Bibi is at making his case, especially to Donald Trump and Mike Huckabee, our ambassador over there. There have been a lot of very interesting phone calls, I think, made it in the last 48 hours.
But I think the call went something like this, the influence, and quite frankly, I agree with it. I'm not a fan of the Netanyahu administration, but I think the talk track would be something like this. This is a chance for you to go down as the first president to show leadership and unlock peace and prosperity and stability in the Middle East. This is the head of the snake, and you are in a unique position now because of our ability, because we, Israel, took out their air defenses, and because the Iranian people have shown that 80% of them disapprove of the Islamic regime, that this is a unique moment in time for you to become one of the most successful presidents of the last 50 years by saying that you turned the superpower that was the most dangerous, with the exception of maybe Russia, anti-American force to be the one that took them down, turned Iran into an ally. There's a unique moment in time here for us to be able to do that. And also, we, the Israelis, we'll do the really fucking hard work. We'll go on the ground and risk thousands of soft agents to go in and do targeted executions or assassinations, gather incredible intel, foment some of these protests, and all you got to do is throw hardware and gas stations in the air and start sending missiles. And I would bet that the majority of the people on the bridge and in the barracks, or whatever the term is, in the control rooms of these aircraft carriers are just as focused on defensive action, making sure that Doha and Dubai and Riyadh don't take incoming. I think that is probably, again, I think that is how we lose and create a more unstable Middle East, that when we show up and start, wagging our dick, quite frankly, that we don't pull up tent and leave these allies vulnerable. But
100%.
I think the argument here that Netanyahu could make to Trump is actually I'm sure he appealed to his ego. How'd you like to be the first president that brought peace and prosperity and stability to the Middle East because of brave Venezuela-like military action?
I agree. One of the big accomplishments of Trump 1.0 and 2.0, he has remade the Middle East, I think, in a better reflection or a better version. But I would add that on that phone call, Bibi said all those things, but he didn't say the JCPOA was keeping Iran in check. It was not perfect. They did not have inspections, anywhere, anytime, but they were not enriching at the levels that they have been. And Israel was the main crusader against that nuclear deal in 2015 and was thrilled when it got ripped up. So I think that we need to measure those things in concert, I guess, that Israel is saying a lot of the right things, and not just the right things to get what they want, but the right things that if you believe in human rights and you believe in democracy and a brighter future for the region is correct. But they are also not talking about one of the biggest diplomatic accomplishments, certainly of the modern era.
The JCPOA?
That Trump ripped up
and to your
with
point,
Israel's cheering.
To your point, what is our ability to execute treaties or agreements that both sides hold to when we don't hold to them?
Well, and on top of it, when we get everyone back to the table, and I'm not saying that I trust the Omanis better than our own intel.
That was a ruse.
At all.
That was a head fake. We've been going
100%.
We've been going in for the last month. We've been coordinating resources. That was all just a head fake. Yeah, have at it. Negotiate. That's time up. Make them believe that there's a chance for a deal here. I think literally the Islamic Republic could have said, you can have inspectors here. We will do whatever you want. You can have American forces on the ground with spectrometers ensuring we're not enriching uranium. I think the day
something
after
was going to happen.
Yeah, I think the day after the sunlight in the Baywatch meets Mel Gibson macho, Gladiator meets Mad Max that Trump values so much. And then this stream of 1,000 cuts from the Epstein files, I think as of 3-4 weeks ago, the decision had been made, and everything else was just a massive head fake. Why don't we? Well, I'll give you the last word.
No, I've had all my last words.
There you go.
I'm good. We'll know more on Monday because we're going 5 days a week.
We are going 5 days a week. And
we'll
speaking of which, make sure you subscribe to get the latest. Thanks, everybody. Have a great rest of the weekend. And Jess, heard your kid in the background. What are you doing this weekend? Actually, let's not do that. We won't do banter there.
We're on a live stream, so I'll just text you what I'm doing. But
there
anyway,
let's leave it there.
I'm going to go take care of them. See you later,
thanks,
Scott.
Jess. Bye now.